The world is preparing for oil shock. India is feeling the heat too. We have an LPG crisis here.
I hope it doesn't last that long. But if it does, then not just us, but I think the whole of Asia, including China and Japan and Korea, would be badly affected because they get a very large share of their energy supplies from that region, which is being affected the most.
According to some estimates, more than 50% of it actually comes from the Gulf region.
This was not very unexpected, so I do believe that we have made some kind of plans for getting an optimal supply.
Similarly, there can be an undersea pipeline from the Gulf. That those are the kind of projects we now need to have with us.
Hello and welcome to the CRF podcast Deep Focus. I'm Neha Khanna. In this episode, we're going to talk about trading through turbulence. Needless to say, these are extremely turbulent times for the world and the global economy, especially on account of the war in West Asia. How should India navigate through this turbulence? To make sense of it for us, we're joined by Dr. Rajiv Kumar. He is the chairman of Pehle India Foundation. And of course, he is very well known as somebody who served as vice chairman of NITI Aayog in the past. We also have with us Ms. Rupa Dutta. She's a distinguished fellow at the CRF and former principal economic advisor at DPIIT. A very warm welcome to both of you. Welcome to Deep Focus.
Great to be here. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you for your time, sir. Let me begin with you and ask you a question pertaining to what is uppermost in everyone's mind these days. First, we saw tariff wars disrupting global trade and supply chains. Now we are witnessing the war in West Asia, severely impacting critical trade routes such as the Strait of Hormuz. The world is preparing for oil shock. India is feeling the heat too. We have an LPG crisis here. The question really is, in this era of turmoil and disruptions, where does India stand in your view in terms of its preparedness and strategy?
Well, it would be better if you asked that question to a government person. So, I wouldn't know the details of it, but what you started off with is actually very relevant, which is that these are very turbulent times. And anybody, some of us who thought that the earth is flat and the end of history, Fukuyama, etc., all that is proven to be wrong. And now we are in these, as you said, unforeseen times. Nobody had expected this at all. So that's Mr. Trump for you. Now, given all that, India's preparedness, from what I've seen, is that while we are very vulnerable to especially energy shocks, because we import 85% of our fossil fuels, and total energy consumption also, including solar, etc. I think we are greatly dependent on imported energy. So to that extent, what happens in the Straits of Hormuz, which provide 20% of the world's fuel and about, I think, maybe 40% plus for us, will leave us quite impacted. Having said that, the good news is that one, we have reasonable strategic reserves. I think we at least have 3 months of it, and there is talk about increasing it up 6 months, so that our vital industries and our vital concerns will not be affected. Plus also the fact that our domestic production of energy, not just petroleum and natural gas, but overall of renewables, solar, wind, I think that's, and hydropower, that's increasing, and the government is focused strongly on that in the last 10 years. In fact, 40% of installed capacity is now renewable. Although the generation is, I think, about 20%, but it can be ramped up because the installed capacity is there. So, in sum, Neha, we are vulnerable, but not to the extent that our vital interests will be affected, at least for the next few months. Now, God forbid, but if
We don't know how long this war is going to last.
I hope it doesn't last that long. But if it does, then not just us, but I think the whole of Asia, including China and Japan and Korea, and others, would be badly affected because they get a very large share of their energy supplies from that region, which is being affected at the moment.
Absolutely. Ms. Lata, let me ask you, as Dr. Kumar points out, it is very well known that India imports 80 to 85% of its required energy. And according to some estimates, more than 50% of it actually comes from the Gulf region. And that has taken a huge hit thanks to this war and the disruption that we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz. While Dr. Kumar seems to believe that we're comfortably placed for the next few months, but we're already witnessing some kind of panic in India. All this talk about LPG crisis, restaurants shutting down. How well placed are we, in your opinion, to really handle this crisis?
Firstly, thanks, Neha, and thanks to the entire everybody team for giving me this opportunity to speak on this issue. Yeah, while I will not be able to quote some specific figures, but I still believe that our government, and coming from a bureaucratic background, I still have a lot of faith in our political as well as bureaucratic system of governance. And I believe that we have made, I mean, this was not very unexpected. So I do believe that we have made some kind of plans for getting an optimal supply to the most required sectors. And as Rajiv Kumar sir said, that we have 40% now renewable energy. May not, everything may not be, it's only now 40, I mean, it's now about 20% being generated. And see, we have seen a lot of crises, including COVID and so many other things. And thankfully, with some blips here and there, we have been able to move out of it. So maybe it is time not to, I would really suggest not to panic and spread this message all across and not to panic. Optimally use your energy sources. If there is a problem with the LNG and all and LPG supply, then look into, there are at least a substantial portion of households can look into use of microwaves, use of electric induction stoves, and and even we, our coal reserves, I was talking to some of these energy experts, and our coal reserve position is still fairly good, so we can go in for more of use of electricity and for cooking purposes, and see what are the alternatives available. So look at the, as sir said, we have 3 months of reserve, maybe we can move on to 6 months. So look at the supply available, try to optimize your demand, try to diversify it in a manner so that given the situation, hopefully the war will not last long. But in case it does, how do we handle it without creating panic or without creating politics about it? This is what.
Well, certainly. Yes, you
Yeah,
want to say something?
but I mean, brings me to the point that this is the time to now think boldly and having faced this, make sure that we don't get into this thing again. Now, and the examples are that I used to work in the Asian Development Bank, and at that time there was a very ambitious project of bringing gas over land from Turkmenistan. They are a very big gas field called Daulatabad, and this was called TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline. And for whatever reasons, etc., we couldn't build that, although it was very advanced, and Turkmenistan was very keen to do that. The Chinese, on the other hand, took all of that gas from Daulatabad right up to Urumqi, Xinjiang, and then on eastwards to their land. Similarly, there can be an undersea pipeline, from the Gulf. Now, why am I saying that? Is that those are the kind of projects we now need to have with us to make us, to reduce our vulnerability for the future, because this sort of crisis can happen again. So why should we get so vulnerable to a 30-kilometer narrow Hormuz lane, and not have the other things, have other means of transporting fossil fuel on which we will remain dependent for for a long time. So hopefully now policy will focus, on developing alternate sources of transporting fossil fuel from the Gulf region, which will continue to account for more than 50% of our total imports, if not more.
You're quite right, sir. It's not just India. I'm guessing the whole world is learning a bitter lesson from this war that perhaps it's time to really look for alternatives. We heard people like the Canadian Prime Minister speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos and talk about the rupture in the world order as we know it. The question is, sir, given this backdrop, how do you believe multilateral institutions like the World Trade Organization can really help address the crisis that we face today? Do you believe an institution like the WTO can help preserve a rules based, predictable world order? Because Donald Trump, let's face it, has dealt multiple blows to multiple institutions like the WTO.
Yeah, I may sound pessimistic, but for me, WTO is passé. It's a post-Second World War organization. It was GATT then, and then it became WTO. WTO was never able to actually bring about a consensus or convergence on several things, including the services trade and so on. There were always disruption, and now with the US, not with Donald Trump, but even earlier, refusing to join what they call the Dispute Resolution Committee, so that whatever WTO decides is by definition not applicable or acceptable to the US, which is the largest economy in the world. So given that, I think I would not look to the WTO any longer. And what you need, therefore, is the 21st century organizations to replace it. And that would happen with with the intermediate powers coming together. And then a very good grouping is, for example, the BRICS, or G20, and a large part of either of those can come together and now try and frame the sort of norms or the rules or whatever which they will voluntarily accept, and then get them to work for them. So the old multilateral rule-based trading order, I think, is over. And Donald Trump has driven the last nail in the coffin. And therefore you need a new one where the leading, and there it's a small plug, but we just wrote a book called Everything All at Once, my co-author, and there we are talking about these 6 transitions that are taking place together. And given that, we are saying business as usual will not do. Okay. So you've got to think differently. And India can be that country who can lead this effort, along with other,
middle powers,
and you can name them, but but BRICS represents a lot of them.
Yeah. So again, BRICS is anathema, as we know, to Donald Trump, but maybe that is really the way forward.
So be it.
Yes.
The point is that we can't possibly run the world according to Mr. Trump's wishes and
whims and fancies. Unfortunately, he seems to think he can run the world according to his whims and fancies. But Ms. Dutta, let me come to you. You heard what Dr. Kumar says. He is not very bullish on institutions like the WTO. He thinks that perhaps it's really a relic of the past. But I want to ask you a question. Not so much about the relevance of WTO, but looking at it from India's lens. Do you believe India's position with the WTO reflects an old protectionist mindset, or is there a strategic effort to preserve policy space for developing economies?
Neha, let me give it a little bit of a twist here. First, yes, whatever Sir said, G20, I mean, I was there when this India was a chair of G20, and how India gave a leadership to the global south, and African Union was incorporated. And now this year, and I remember 21, last time India was a BRICS chair was in 21, and at that time it was all COVID and vaccines. And now it is a totally different perspective altogether. We are talking about multilateral pragmatism. But given in this context, I would still say while WTO is not as relevant as it was, and there have been a lot of countries who have misused the provisions of WTO, but till now about 70% of the trade happens through the MFN route. And yes, for WTO, because it was an integral part of my earlier Ministry of Commerce, there was a feeling, and I'm using slightly diplomatic language, India was known as the elephant in the room because we were kind of, preserving our policy space and going against whatever the prevalent feeling in WTO was. That attitude has probably changed. Now I think the global south and other countries look at India for providing policy direction. While we have been labeled protectionist, but now I think we can take a leadership. There is a MC14 happening very soon where we can take a leadership. Yes, the consensus based model does create problems in getting decisions done. And WTO rules were framed when the developed countries were already industrialized. So now they have to take into account the development gaps. And WTO is now looking at plurilateralism, which may not be the best thing. We still believe in multilateralism in India, and there are issues of food security and public stockholding and MSP procurement, for which it has been non-negotiable for India. So WTO still, I would say, has a role, may not be as big as it was earlier, but this is a time maybe for the developing countries to be more center stage, provide and work towards getting a consensus based approach, with I would still say India being a leader. Now that we have navigated G20 and now BRICS, let us take this forward even in the WTO.
Okay. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, we've talked about the ongoing wars and the impact that they may be having on the global economy and India's economy. Let's talk about another very important development that has taken place in recent months. We've seen India conclude a series of major free trade agreements with multiple countries, the big one being the India-European Union Free Trade Agreement. In your assessment, sir, what are the key takeaways from this particular free trade agreements and which sectors stand to gain the most?
Well, let's hope the India-EU free trade agreement actually gets operational soon. There's no date for that yet.
Though there is hope that it should be operational by the end of this year?
Well, that's the hope.
Okay.
But it has to go through several ratifications in Europe, etc., through the parliaments. No? So let's hope that it does. And then very clearly, the most benefited sector would be the garments, because there we had faced a big disadvantage vis-a-vis Bangladesh and Vietnam, who had duty-free exports to Europe while we didn't, and we lost out on the market. And that's a 10% disadvantage that we had. So that will be the best one that we get. That's one. Along with that, maybe the gems and jewelry and the other exporting sectors. The fact, however, Neha, is that the past are FTAs that we have signed with the ASEAN or Thailand or Korea and so on have not proven very beneficial for us. In fact, the one which we have signed with Sri Lanka, the trade with Sri Lanka, bilateral trade outside the FTA categories, is larger than the one which is in the FTAs, for various reasons. Now, I'm saying that simply to say that FTAs are the sufficient condition, but the necessary condition is to build competitiveness of the Indian industry. Yes. And that's the key. And that is what we should be doing now. And that's the reason for which we didn't join the RCEP, because we felt that we will be outcompeted by the Chinese or the others and so on. So therefore, if we have those 8 months from here to the end of the year, so if we want to make the best use of India-EU FTA, we should focus on a few sectors, whether they are covered under the production linked incentive scheme, the PLI, choose within those, and then focus laser-like on saying that here is where we will improve our share in the world market, and where the EU free trade agreement will also be helpful. But the necessary condition, and I repeat, is to make our industries competitive. And for that purpose, my own feeling is that the most important thing that you need today in India, and the Prime Minister said this as well, which is to reduce what the regulatory and compliance burden on our Indian industry, and for the Indian government, the Indian state, to become a promotional state which promotes the private sector rather than a regulatory state. Now, and we can begin on that tomorrow. So I would like to see that beginning happen, because if that does, then EU FTA will be beneficial for us. Otherwise, not. Just one final thing, which is that the EU itself, however, is become very sort of non-tariff protectionism, especially vis-a-vis the environment matters, and so therefore, and they have not relented on that. So they will therefore subject our exports of things like steel or automobiles or whatever or components to that particular or agro processed food. We need to work through that as well, and that's really that's a like if you like a sort of a caution that let's not start expecting too much for all these reasons. But yes, for garments and for a couple of other sectors, it's very good news.
So you've made some very important points. Ms. Datta, Dr. Kumar, sounding the note of caution that while it's good to be optimistic about this deal, we also have to bear in mind that a lot of our FTAs in the past haven't benefited us all that much. And, I will come back to the issue of FTAs and non-tariff barriers that Sir raised in just a moment. But before that, Ms. Datta, I want to ask you this question about the India-US interim trade deal. Now, after much back and forth and rather tough and long drawn-out negotiations, the two countries finally reached an interim trade deal. But one critical question that needs to be asked is, how does India protect its agricultural sector? As you know, it's a very sensitive issue here in this country. And is it absolutely critical, you think, for India to continue protecting its dairy industry from imports? This is a big concern as far as the India-US trade deal is concerned.
Neha.
Because the fine print is yet to be fully spelled out.
Why only the India-US interim trade deal? Even for you and all these FTAs, which we have now signed with the developed countries, which is a point which is being mentioned, not countries who were similar to us earlier in the levels of development, but these are developed countries. Now, they have the different, why only agriculture? First, let me start with the labor intensive sectors, whether it is gems and jewelry, whether it's leather, or whether it's textiles. All these, if we have to work out with the FTAs, then they have to move up the value chain, and that is true for agriculture also. They have to move up the value chain. They have to cater to the demand of the developed country markets. And for agriculture, our agriculture is not very productive. It only contributes about 16% of GDP, whereas 40% of our population is employed there. What it needs is, yes, protection to a certain extent, but what it also needs is a lot of investment and focus on factors like irrigation, modern methods of technology, modern agricultural techniques, etc. Our agricultural products, in fact, we can move into the higher end agricultural products, processed products, which have a lot of demand in the developed country markets. So protection, this is a thing which was done for the auto industry, and finally we see how the auto components and other industries have done well once the protective cover was removed to a certain extent. So let us look at the dairies, let us look at, yes, dairy, very sensitive, huge number of people dependent on dairy products. But give them the right kind of nudge. I'm absolutely sure that both our agriculture and dairy sectors, and as I said, with the investment, with the back end and front end coming together, you look at these producers and help them to move ahead in the value chain, and then we can get their products can also compete in the developed country markets. I'll just end with a sector which I was closely associated with, and even now I am, the gems and jewelry sector. And this is a labor intensive sector, very large number of MSMEs. Just don't look at the few large jewelers, so to say. So there, and I remember we used to have these discussions, and now it is working out. Out of the exports of 40 billion, about 94%, the major exported item was cut and polished diamonds. Okay. We used to cut and polish diamonds, 94% of world's cut and polished diamonds. But there has to be a saturation point. So then after discussions and a lot of interactions, now they have started looking at 9-carat jewelry, 11-carat jewelry, jewelry more like a fashion product, something which the millennials buy. So they've started moving up the value chain, and they're getting their, markets in the developed country, and also even supplying to Tiffany's and Cartiers, which we should do in a very much larger scale. So what we need is the right kind of push, We have the export promotion mission, we have the PLIs, we have interest equalization scheme ties, and so on, and so many other schemes of government, and also a lot of hand holding of exporters, outreach programs. Let the back, I will repeat it, back end and front end come together, and these trade deals, they were done after a lot of stakeholder consultation, which is a new factor now. So let these trade deals be more inclusive, help the MS, especially the MSME, to become more compliant, and as you said, the sensitive areas may be a red line for a short period, but finally we could move in towards an overall, looking at a Viksit Bharat vision for the entire country over time, and where all sectors can participate.
All right. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, let me come back to the concern that you raised earlier. You know, it has been seen, and you pointed it out, sir, earlier, that as tariffs fall through free trade agreements, non tariff barriers seem to be shaping market access. Looking at the FTAs that we have concluded over the years, and including those in the recent past, do they really address the challenge of non tariff barriers for Indian exports? Or do regulatory barriers, in effect, continue to limit the real benefits of these trade agreements?
Yeah, the free trade agreements, especially what is called there's a separate another word for CECP, Comprehensive Economic and something like that. They also cover non-tariff barriers, so they do provide market access, and that's the key. Whether the FTAs improve your market access to these market, and I think they do, but I therefore want to repeat myself, which is that it's not market access which is the problem. It is our competitiveness which is the problem. And therefore, that's the one that we need to focus on. And for that, if we can do, as Rupa said, if we can have 93% of, polished diamond market for the small, for the sort of minuscule diamonds, etc., we can aspire to have similar share in other world trade flows, which we don't. And therefore, my thought was that when I was in NITI Aayog, I had sort of insisted and lost that the PLI should be a much smaller scheme. But now it's expanded to 14, and I'm sure we can't do the 14 altogether. We'll not achieve that. Electronics, mobile phones are the one that started there. Their exports have gone up from $2 to $20 billion, in 3 years. So that's the sort of thing that you want to do, and which is why what you need to do is to pick up your national champions and work with them. And therefore, the trust-based relationship between the government and the private sector, where the two can sort of agree on certain targets. Look, this is the one that we want to go for. That's what is required. So, the ball is firmly in our court and not that much in the sort of question of, non-profit, non-tariff or tariff barriers to the other market access. US was never a protected economy. Donald Trump has made and not made, etc. But we were, our exports to the US were all about, I think, $100 billion or less actually, because the total trade is about that much. China exports 500 billion. So why don't we aspire for? And so we should get into the reasons for why our export sector, India has suffered from export pessimism for decades, and we've not been an export-driven economy, and we need to be that. So therefore, you need to select sectors, work together, bring all this, and try and breach the sort of, breach the impediments that you see, and which impediments I think lie more in the domestic action rather than in the market.
Which is why I guess there's just so much talk all the time about some much needed reforms at home. Dr. Kumar makes an excellent point that it isn't always about restricted market access. It's perhaps more about the competitiveness of our industry. So let's dwell on this point a little further. Ms. Datta, let me ask you this question. It's interesting. Sir is with us here. He served as Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog. I want to quote a recent report by NITI Aayog, which actually suggests that India's trade deficit with its FTA partners has widened. So let me ask you a more fundamental question. Does India need to rethink its approach to free trade agreements?
As Sir has mentioned already, yes. if we look at our earlier FTAs, it is not a very good progress report. In fact, the other countries have done, with whom we had FTAs, whether it was Japan or ASEAN countries, there was a lot of flooding of our markets from products of these countries and even other countries using the FTA route. So I would say the exporters of these countries of those FTA related countries have done much better than what our exporters could do, and which is why the trade deficit has increased. And it is probably true even for the latest FTAs which we have done. But again, I would repeat the point that this is and reiterate what Sir said. Here, government has to act as a catalyst. It has to be a facilitator. Government and private sector have to come together, and even for the PLI schemes, all sectors may not be working, but there are some sectors. So you don't thinly spread your resources. You spread your resources in a manner where you see that your benefits are higher than cost, and accordingly invest. Work with the probably with a hub and spoke model also, where the big firms can give some kind of guidance to the MSME sector, help them in compliance related issues, because 45% of our exports come from MSMEs, and that still needs a lot much more moving up the value chain, lot much more focus on compliance related issues and quality. So let government and private sector come together to promote exports. Maybe initially, our FTAs with the current FTAs, there's I would not really take names, but there's a feeling that while our exports have increased substantially, so has the imports. So let us maybe this is a temporary phase, which our exporters, once they start seeing the benefit, there are a lot of people who feel that the kind of documents and all required for taking the FTA route may not be worth it, the kind of benefits they get. So that is where the ease of doing business, the reduction in compliances and regulations, improving ease of living, and giving the right kind of nudge to our exporters, again acting as a facilitator, will probably help in our exporters also very soon take advantage of this FTAs, and then we see a more balanced trade.
So now just following up on that about government acting as a facilitator, the view that we have taken in the Pehle India Foundation, and we are working on it, is that a pan-India export promotion policy is a non-starter.
Okay.
What is good for the Punjab, which is double landlocked, cannot be relevant for Tamil Nadu, which has centuries of trading experience, and have been all over, or Odisha for that matter, which. So therefore, what you need to do today,
it has to be state specific.
State specific. That's what we're talking about. It has, because every state's competitive and comparative advantage is completely different from the other.
Yeah.
Now, the Gujaratis and the
One
Kutchis.
size doesn't fit all.
So it cannot, and this is what we've been doing, and I've said this in umpteen times to the government, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to ring a bell. So now we have started working. We've got an export promotion policy for the UP, and I promise you that within the next year or so, that if we are going to do it, it will show an impact.
Okay.
Because you've selected, even in a place like UP, the large as it is, 75 districts. Even in UP, you can't have one simple export promotion policy, because what is good for Bundelkhand cannot be good for Varanasi.
Yeah.
So that's the key. To begin with, have state-specific export promotion policies. Bring the states on board to say that let's work together. And exports are the key to our future growth. That's still not still not a universally understood phenomenon. So that's the first step you need to take.
That's a very important point to make. I wonder if domestic politics sometimes gets in the way of the center and the states working together and cooperating.
Not really. Every political party in the country is a nationalist. And if you talk about, to any government, that look, we got to work together to improve our exports, and you offer them the state-specific incentives, if you like, because some state may want something different than the other. For example, Punjab may want some subsidy or a fiscal incentive on the transport side, because their transport costs are so large. But on the other hand, some other state may want, more focus on skill preparation.
Yeah.
So therefore, all of this means that the action Rupa, with all due respect to you, has to shift out of Vanajya Bhavan to the
Yes, sir.
state-specific commerce
Absolutely.
divisions, and that be the key to going forward.
So let me ask you this question. India has been accused of protectionism for a long time now, especially by the United States under Donald Trump. How globally competitive are Indian industries today, in your view? Do they still need protection from imports, or has the time come for India to move much more decisively towards being a more open economy and accepting of competition?
Yeah, so I was an economic advisor with Dr. Manmohan Singh in the Ministry of Finance from 91 to 95. So which was the time when we opened up. And if you look at India's growth trajectory, there was a decisive break. And one of the key things that we did was that we opened up our economy at that time. We made it less protectionist than it was earlier. So the lesson for me is that if the more open an economy India is, the better off you would be in terms of your own growth and integration with the world.
The more competitive it makes us.
The more competitive it makes. And Rupa gave that example of the automobile industry. Once the protection was lifted, the auto components are now, I think, $6 or $5 billion worth of exports of auto components. So therefore, generally, overall, we've had the highest tariff rates in the world for a very long time. I think our average was about 11.5%. The US had 3%, and
Donald Trump loses the opportunity to remind us of
to
that.
remind us of that. Never misses one. So we need to bring that down. However, we need to be also selective and careful in that. We made a mistake, for example, in signing I forget the term, the International Convention on Electronics Hardware.
ITA, sir.
Huh?
ITA.
ICA. So where we agreed, in the UPA government to say that there will be zero tariffs on all electronics hardware. That killed our hardware industry. Similarly, for our advanced pharmaceuticals, where we had several very good firms to begin with, including Hindustan Pharmaceuticals Limited, finished, and now we have to import all of it from China. Our entire pharma industry, believe me, Neha, is now critically dependent on imports from China. Because all the advanced pharmaceutical ingredients come from there. So
We were supposed to be the pharmacy of the world.
yeah, we are the pharmacy of the world, but we produce the end product, the formulation, the tablets, the capsules, etc., and the generics. But the ingredients come abroad. Now we need to protect that. So therefore, what you need to do is again be very selective and very focused. Work with the industry to say, okay, these are the segments that we want to protect, as few as possible. And these are the segments.
Do you think dairy needs to be one of them? Because there's been so much talk about it in the context of the India-US trade deal.
It's a very politically loaded issue, and therefore it'd be very difficult. But if I could, I would make dairy open. I tell you why. Because our productivity of our cattle stock is the lowest in the world. We have a huge, cattle stock. I forget the numbers. It's in, of course, hundreds of millions. But our milk production per cattle is 1/10 of what it can be. And the irony is that our indigenous breed called Gir, the Gir cow, which is was taken from here to Brazil, and now the Gir Brazil produces, I think, about 10 times the milk that our Gir produces. So where is the impetus for our farmers or for our dairy industry to improve the cattle productivity? That impetus could come if there was a threat of imports. Now, what sensible countries do is to give themselves a timeline. Announce today that in 10 years' time, your protection will go to zero. This is what we did, by the way, with automobiles. When Maruti came along. We said 5 years or 10 years you need 90% indigenization, and then the protection will finish. Same thing we can do here. Because our cattle needs a huge productivity improvement. And I would feel that, but again, as I said, you have to do it very carefully. You have to take the farmers on board with you. We didn't do that 2 years ago, and therefore Delhi was blocked off, and we had to rescind those very good farming laws.
farmers. Yes.
Very, very good farming laws. We have to
And
take
then you
them
also
back.
have the opposition accusing the government of selling out the country
So
and the
on and
farmers'
so you have to
interests.
take the opposition with you as well to say that you are doing this to improve the farmer's income. For example, make Amul the champion of this particular policy. Why not? And there are, and like Amul, there are maybe about a dozen large cooperatives which will benefit, with improved, productivity of the dairy sector. So, and our free trade with New Zealand and has been hanging fire only because of this. But so what am I saying? Competition is good to improve productivity, but competition must be handled with care and with cooperation from the affected.
Take the stakeholders along and have a timeline in place. And I guess that also boils down to the right kind of communication. Um, Ms. Datta, we've talked about global trade. Let's talk about regional trade for a moment. Why has regional trade, in your view, underperformed within frameworks like SARC? And can India play a larger role in sort of revitalizing intra regional trade in South Asia?
Uh, See, that's a very interesting question. Not many people are talking about the SARC trade anymore, or even we used to have those.
It seems to
SARC.
be, as a construct, defunct as of today.
Yes.
Because Pakistan is not in it.
Yes, exactly.
It is in it, but we don't talk to them.
We don't talk to them.
Whereas South Asia, I think, has the largest concentration of poorest people in the world, and the lowest per capita income. So, and inter-regional trade can always play a bigger role, and maybe as they say, development is the only way out. So, once we other countries start communicating with each other, uh, I don't know how politically right it is, but maybe Pakistan also comes in. And there is a, because look at this region, it is all, the communication, it's contiguous, communication and movement is not so difficult. Yes, we have different kind of neighbors. As somebody had once, I remember, said that the way you cannot choose your family, you cannot choose your neighbors. Yes, we have maybe not so good neighbors, but let India, again, taking off from what you said, be the leader even in this area, because anyway India is known as a big brother. So take that in a positive, give it a positive spin. Let India take the lead, and let us start with the I would say low hanging fruits, like Northeast with Bangladesh, our trade with Bhutan, Nepal, and even Maldives and Sri Lanka, where India played a more positive role in getting their economic impact to improve. And then maybe we see how we handle difficult and thorny issues like Pakistan, which also I would feel once economic development is in place and income start increasing, productivity starts increasing, people stop forgetting about more negative issues. Development. A man who has been well fed, who has his right kind of housing, shelter, and clothing, will not really think of divisive tendencies. So, I mean, these are old sayings. So let development be the key issue. And of course, trade and regional connectivity, all these will play a role. But let development and economic upliftment, improvement of per capita incomes and productivity be a key issue where India plays a key role, taking all other smaller countries along.
So Neha, I have a freaky idea on this one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I did a project on this, and Shiv Shankar Menon supported me at that time when he was the foreign secretary, and which is that you got to change yourself from being a big brother to a small brother. And how do you do that? Because, and which is what I suggested was that give your border provinces, the border states, a much bigger role in their interaction with the countries across the border. So let Bihar and UP interact with Nepal. Forget when they
Center can take a back seat. Is that what you
they
suggest?
must take a back seat, and therefore the southern economies, the four southern states, they in Sri Lanka should become a natural fifth state, and then they will
They're not going to be very happy if you
Yes.
hear you say this.
Who?
Yes, I was
This is
thinking
like
that.
Trump saying Canada is the 51st
No.
state.
Okay, so no. But sorry about that. My apology. But already Sri Lanka can be much better integrated in the southern setup than and you give Tamil Nadu and Kerala the way forward, and the bridge that we've been talking about. Similarly about about Bangladesh that Rupa mentioned. If you let the northeastern states and West Bengal, Tripura, work with Bangladesh. Now, the only thing that you require is the center saying that we trust the states to do whatever they are doing. The two Punjabs can get on famously together. And I've sort of been so. That's one step that you could take, which will make South SARC, revive again. Okay. And become a vibrant organization again. At the moment, by the way, our intra-regional trade is 4% of the total trade. Nothing at all. Yeah. So, is that a policy that can be working? Okay. I hope so.
Well, you certainly have some very interesting ideas, but it's hard to be, I think, bullish or optimistic about SARC at the moment, given the state of affairs, between India and Pakistan. But let me shift the focus to another very important player, not just a regional player, but a global player, China. Now, for decades now, China has been the engine of global growth. But with its sort of growth and economy now slowing down, how much of a shift do you think, a structural shift, this is for the global economy? And how much of an opportunity, sir, do you believe this is for India? Because there are many who've talked about how under Trump, many countries are maybe looking to de-risk from the US. And of course, many have been looking to de-risk from China for a long time now. Where does India come in here then? Are we stepping up to the plate?
No, let's remember that China grew at 10% per annum on average for 3 decades. Yeah. 1990 to 2020. Right? In 1990, our per capita incomes are same, India and China.
It's a tough factor.
And now they are 5 times our size. Right? Yes. So I'm saying that simply to say that now if they're growing at 5, it's a huge, much bigger economy. It's a $19 trillion economy. Yes. So that 5% also has a big impact on growth. I just saw the figure. Their contribution to global growth is still more than ours, but not as big as it was earlier. So that slowing down had to come. Yes. At that level. This is our big opportunity.
Is it a big moment?
It's a big opportunity. The China plus one, thing that we talked about. We have almost missed out on that. Because the Vietnamese and the Vietnams and the Indonesians and the Thais, they benefited because companies moved out and they moved to these countries. Very few, if any, came here. Now that's the thing that we should be trying to work on. And I'm very glad to see that the P-Note 3, PM3 has now just been removed yesterday, day before. Which banned the FDIs from China, the neighboring countries, etc. That's finally been gone. Now is the time to attract Chinese investment into India and Chinese companies or otherwise. So India is at that stage where we can and we must strive to grow 8% and 10% plus. And that would mean that we will take away the baton, from China for global growth. But I'm afraid we won't be able to do that if we remain, as it were, at loggerheads with China. Okay. And I think that the government has decided is not the way forward. Yeah. And that the two countries will have to work together.
We've already seen.
I think that's happened. I think that's happened already. Yes. And if the two countries come together and work together, then I think we have the potential for creating a new world order, which we talked about earlier. Yes. In the context of the
new world order. But then again, to attract more investment, whether from China or elsewhere, you need a conducive environment. You've got to be able to give that confidence to potential investors. Are we really being able to do enough of that?
I'm afraid not. In fact, the other thing is a lot of our HNIs are actually moving out of India.
They have left in record numbers in the last decade.
Sanjay Baru has written this wonderful book, called The Secession of the Successful. Yes. That has to stop. Yes. And for that, as Rupa said earlier, all the stakeholders have to be brought together. The business, the government, the civil society, and the academia have all have to work together, and the media, for example, to say that look, we have a goal now of being a high income economy by 2047. Let's all pull together in that direction. Now, what will be that unit where these stakeholders will come together? It, India is too large for that, so you've got to make it more state specific. In fact, again, we've gone one step further in Pehle India Foundation's project. We are saying that our districts can be that unit, and that will be the governance transformation bottom up. Each district in India, Neha, is 3 million people. And I checked the figures, there are 60 countries smaller than that. So each district can be a unit where people, and you think about it, a district town, the business people, the administration, the civil society, the academia, they all know each other. And they can come together and hold each other accountable. And, and that you can grow it. And then you'll create that environment where,
Investors would want to come in large numbers. Ms. Datta, let me ask you this. And I want to quote a report by the National Council of Applied Economic Research. It says India's logistics costs are estimated at about 7.97, that's almost 8% of the GDP, which is closer to global benchmarks but still above the most efficient economies. According to you, what further reforms do we need to reduce those logistics costs and to improve export competitiveness, especially for our MSMEs?
See, firstly, let me tell you, Neha, that report, when we were in DPIIT, there was earlier an Anderson report, which nobody knew what the sources were, which said that India's logistics costs were 13%. So we worked together, as I said, with the academia, and they initially started with secondary data. Even that gave a logistics cost percentage of GDP around 8 to 9%. This time they have come up with primary data. They have done extensive surveys, and this is the figure which gives a good understanding of the logistics scenario in the country. Several steps have already been taken by government, whether it's a PM Gati Shakti, which gives, which covers the infrastructure ministries and which gives the overall mapping of the infrastructure scenario in the country. We have the National Logistics Policy. We have a major logistics division in DPIIT, which may finally become a ministry. We also, our LPI, in the World Bank's LPI index, our rankings have improved from 44 to 38. So we are doing better, but there are a lot of issues here. One major issue I would say is that most of our, I think there is data which shows that most of our cargo goes by, 70% of our cargo goes by roads, which need to change this. We have to make it more, this multimodal mix has to be more optimal. We have to focus more on railways and waterways later. Waterways have still not, we have the Inland Water Development Authority and other bodies, but they have not received the kind of attention we require. And railway especially, there are dedicated freight corridors being set up, several other measures being taken, highway expansion, port modernization, improvement in rail freight capacity. We have platforms like ULIP and all, which are working together with different ministries. Railways, I think the whole freight, the kind of subsidy provided, the kind of loading, unloading capabilities. In fact, there are instances where a man missing in a particular capacity actually hinders the freight movement by 2 to 3 days. So the timing gets increased. So we have, these are some of the areas which we really need to work. This has to be, for logistics cost to be less. Yes, one angle is the ease of doing business, ease of living. Looking at bills like the Jan Vishwas, reduce the compliance related burdens, decriminalize the acts. That is one angle of it. Second angle is working together in a cohesive manner with all stakeholders considered. And third angle is also look at, improve our other modes of transport, which definitely waterways, which are eco-friendly and have a huge potential, and also railways. Railways with this passenger freight kind of conundrum they come up with, where they try to, not increase the passenger fares and work more on the freight. That has to be more optimally utilized. That would be a very efficient way of carrying our goods. So, people who come to the country have to be this supply chain hedging and friend shoring. Yes, other countries have taken more advantage, but as I said, this is a time when India can get into the act and prove that we actually mean business, and whether it's our transportation, whether it's our logistics, whether it's our the environment at the field level for doing business, we are really serious about it, and we can work together to promote getting more investment and look at overall development, because in Bharat by 2047.
Sure. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, talking about India proving to the world that it means business, how can we get more private investment in export-oriented R&D so that India can move from low-value exports to more complex and high-value products?
Why do we want to do that? I don't think that's.
You don't think it's
I
necessary?
don't think it's a good idea.
It's not a good
We've
idea.
always thought about, we will export chips, but not not what is this? Not potato chips. Why? If potato chips generate more employment, I think we should go for those.
Okay.
And why should we always try and believe that we are capable of more than what we are actually capable of? So let's start where we can start.
Okay.
And at the moment,
But more R&D can't hurt.
more R&D will never hurt. And the fact is that we don't do R&D. Our private sector doesn't do R&D.
Exactly.
I don't know if you know the numbers. 0.67% of the GDP is they spend on R&D, which comes to a figure, I don't want to mention it, which is less than some of the big companies in the US. This is what and of that 0.67%, Neha, 80% is done by public sector. So only 20% of 0.67%, meaning about 0.14%.
So, as we come to the end of this conversation, I want to ask one final question of both of you, starting with you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. I don't mean to sound alarmist, but we need to be cognizant of what's happening around us at the moment. How concerned do you think we need to be about the impact of the war in West Asia on the global economy and India's energy security? With oil prices soaring, the markets tumbling, and growing fears of inflation, could the world be staring at a recession?
The world, I don't know about the world actually. I can't talk about that because it's, this whole thing impacting different economies in very different ways. But we in India have to be very careful. And the impact of what's going on, and God forbid that it gets prolonged because the human costs are terrible. But if it does get prolonged, all bets are off because then our energy induced inflation, our shortages can affect the entire economy in many different ways. And which is why I think, one, if India can, and I'm not sure that we can play a role in bringing this conflict to an earlier end. That we should try our best to do that. And two, because I think we are the chair of the BRICS now, and we can bring people together and get some sort of, as it were, convergence on this early end of the war. I think it will be better. And two, I think, as I said earlier, this is a time for taking very bold decisions and implementing them. And I think so as to safeguard or so as to insulate our economy from any such incident going forward. So I'm very concerned about how long this conflict will go on. So, and I hope that the government will already announce plans to reduce our energy vulnerability going forward and actually act on them in a very urgent manner. I'm saying this simply because we've achieved our installed capacity targets for renewable energy, but only 50% of that is generating. So our generation is still heavily dependent on fossil fuel, coal and oil. That has to change. And if that changes, we'll be better off.
Ms. Datta, your quick final thoughts on this.
Uh, Fully reiterating whatever sir said, we can only hope be that the war comes. I think it's taking too much of toll of human life as well as we all know oil prices soaring and inflation and energy crisis hitting the whole world. We can only, I would say, let's hope and pray that better sense prevails on all the parties. They tone down their aggression and come to, it's not an easy thing, but yes, India can play a leadership role in this, approach all the parties and try to get into, see, I don't think anybody's going to surrender, or so it has to be a kind of negotiated settlement where nobody loses their face and everybody feels they win, but the world wins at the end. Let's hope and pray for that.
Let's certainly hope that the parties involved can find an off ramp at the earliest, because, like you said, often it is an off ramp or a face saver that brings such conflicts to an end. And we're all really keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that this conflict comes to an end at the earliest. Nobody can really afford for this to go on much longer. On that note, thank you so much to both of you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on Deep Focus.
Thanks, Tan. Thanks a ton, Neha. And great being here. And all the best.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed watching our latest episode of Deep Focus, where we talked to Dr. Rajiv Kumar, former Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, and Ms. Rupa Dutta about the state of the Indian economy and the global economy and the challenges that they currently face in the context of the ongoing war in West Asia. Do look out for the next episode of Deep Focus. Meanwhile, like, share, and subscribe to CRF's YouTube channel. Bye for now.